Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're going to give people a minute or two to trickle in. A lot of people are coming from the live session. And so some people might be getting a water break and all of that. So just another minute and then we'll get started. But we really appreciate you guys joining. All right. I'm sure we'll have some latecomers trickling in, but I'll get us started. My name is Kellen. I'm from the Learning Agency, and I'm helping organize the Data Science for Everyone Coalition. We are so excited to have you here today for this networking session on curriculum implementation with our speaker, Kristin Hunter-Thomson from Dataspire. In the first part of the session, we'll host a mini Ask Me Anything with Kristin, where she'll share remarks on curriculum implementation before we open up to questions from you, which you can share in the chat at any time. After the mini AMA, we'll have a series of a 10-minute breakout sessions in small groups where you'll get to connect on a closer level with other participants interested in this topic. A little bit more background on Kristin. She is the founder and director of Dataspire. Pulling on her experiences with students from elementary school to adulthood, Kristin assists schools and districts in developing resources and works to facilitate professional learning opportunities for teachers. Kristin also writes about data science education, and her work can be found in NSTA's Science Scope and Ed Post. I will now give Kristin the floor to talk a little bit more about her work before she answers any questions that you guys may have. So take it away, Kristin.
Thanks, Kellen. Awesome. Great to see everybody. Curious if anybody else's head is spinning from like the conversations and the panel that we have. For those of you I can see nodding, great. For those whose videos maybe aren't, yeah, Jeanette, awesome. Like let's put some less yes in the chats. Like there's so many great thoughts and ideas that came up from those panelists early today, and I'm just so deeply appreciative for all the work. Curious to hear from folks in the room, how many of you are currently integrating data related, I'm going to use that more broad term, curriculum implementation with schools and districts right now? You can put a yes in the chat, or are thinking about doing it in the coming year. Do we have sort of, I presume there's a reason why we're all here, getting a sense that some folks are doing it now, it's coming up, thinking about it. Awesome, excellent. So I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about who I am and what it is that I do. Sorry, just one second. Oh, gotta get, it was all queued up and then I got talking to Kellen and things then went away. Okay, so first I want to say I am not the expert on this, but I am super excited to be learning from all of you. And I think across all of us, we're creating such amazing work and changing things in the field. So lots of discussion came up earlier about this. And so I just want to share out from the beginning kind of what I mean by the terms data literacy fluency and data science. I see them as very interconnected and different components. The way I look at it is the way a lot of our panelists had looked at it previously. My work primarily is in the data literacy side of things to feed in and support future data science work. And this was something that also came up earlier on our panelists, and this question about technology. And I think technology is a really big piece of it, but I do not think that it is all of it, and it is certainly not all of what I do on the work that I do. And so just before I kind of continue on, just want to spend a little bit of a time to be like, so what is it that I do? I am that statistic that my job did not exist when I went to school. I call myself a data literacy educator. So what does that mean? I build out curriculum resources, but I also do a lot of sort of searching of all the great things that others are putting out there. And I take time to look at what the research says about how we learn from data and use my classroom lens. I used to be a middle school science teacher, grades 5 through 9, and combine all of that together to create classroom ready strategies for teachers to be able to implement, and then work with schools and districts to create that implementation sort of district-wide or school-wide with the schools that I am working with. And I have to say, once I got started, there was a great handful of teachers and schools that were on board and they saw the need for this, but there was oftentimes a lot more of like, okay, that's nice, Kristin, like we know we need that, but there's so many other priorities. And then this happened to us where we all lived and watched in real time while our world not only figured out a novel virus and how to build out our public health system, but also how to become data literate at a really in a really short amount of time. And we saw lots of people making decisions at the policy level based on graphs that maybe were being put together in some interesting fashions and how that information was getting communicated. And I would say this was a real big turning point. So while our schools were pivoting in so many directions at once to handle the pandemic and how to incorporate that into our education space, there was also this like rising urgency of, oh man, we really need to prepare all of our students for this 21st century in how data sort of rich it is and all of those pieces. And so I just want to take a few minutes to kind of share out with you some of the things that are core to my approach when I'm working with schools and districts in doing integration and implementation into their curriculum around data. So on that slide where I was talking about how I think of data literacy and data science, I talked about data being a process, like working with data as a process. One of the big things I do is helping students realize that they are active participants. It's not a tool or platform that does it for them, and helping teachers and schools realize it's not linear and that the complexity builds over time. And that is a big piece of what I do. And I like using this analogy in that my first grader plays what I call amoeba ball, where you can tell where the soccer ball is because it is where all the kids are on the field. And that looks really different than our US team that went to the Olympics last year. And for those of us in the K-12 space, we are not trying to make Olympians. We are not trying to make professional data scientists. Instead, we are trying to figure out how do we prepare our students coming out of K-12 to go into the workforce, to go into 2-year or 4-year colleges, to go into being active citizens of our country and making sense of the data around them. And so one thing that came up earlier in the panelists, and this is a big focus of what I do, is how do we sequence this out? And how do we do what we do all across the country with soccer, but for data skills of thinking about that age and stage and where kids are at with their data skills and providing that support. And so one of the big things I do with schools and districts as we're thinking about integrating into their curriculum, because I should say, I am curriculum agnostic and I am platform tool agnostic. So I meet schools where they're at with their curriculum, but I really focus on how do we think about this strategically? So across grade bands or across subject areas, how are we approaching building this data literacy through the sequence of the K-12 space? And sort of in that, I am curriculum and platform agnostic. I work with teachers where they're at and schools where they're at, is that I have a large emphasis on personalizing the strategies and to create success, to create a space and an on-ramp for teachers to feel successful, that they can integrate this in and implement this into what they have. Be that a new activity that we're folding in, or we're revising the curriculum that they currently have, they're using the tool better that they have, or they are building on, they're adding in a new tool to their toolkit, but really personalizing it with ways to integrate those strategies in, I found to be really helpful. So just wanted to give you a little sense of kind of what that looks like with one of the districts that I was working with this past year. So this is a district here in New Jersey where I am currently based, and I worked with all of their science teachers in grades 5 through 12 through the year. And it started with me bringing resources to the table. And so helping the teachers figure out what could we expect from the students sort of by the end of the year, what could we hope that they would be able to accomplish in terms of specific skills. And I break this down to a far smaller grade than say any of our standards typically have. And then what are some guiding questions that teachers could use to assess sort of formatively along the way if students have that. So formative assessments are great, but we also need tangible resources for teachers to use. So I also help them build out rubrics that aligned with the rubrics that they were currently using in their districts for those data skills. And then last summer, we got together teachers from each of the grade levels, and we looked at their curriculum map, and we picked out at least one activity in every unit that they had where data was already there, or it could be easy to complement with a data activity. And we revised it so that what the students were doing with data aligned with what we were hoping the students were practicing in that grade level. So we were aligning kind of the curriculum they had with our sense of where do we want the students to be, what do we want them to be practicing on. And then what came up earlier at one of the chats of building this community of practice, I was then with them all year long with synchronous support, asynchronous support, one-on-one coaching, checking in, as well as classroom observation to support them. And really my focus is on empowering up the teachers from within the district to carry this forward. If I've done my job well, they have integrated it into their curriculum, they're implementing data skills throughout their subject areas, and then I leave and they continue carrying it forward. So a lot of that is what I bring to the table, but then what also they ask for. So what other topics are they interested in working with? So that's kind of like a quick run through of kind of one district on how I've helped them implement data into their curriculum. There were big discussions about math and computer science earlier today and how those intersect with data science. I believe really strongly that data literacy and data skills should be integrated into all of our different subject areas, and that actually the intersection of it getting into all of our subject areas creates great opportunities for our students. And similarly to what kind of was alluded to earlier, is where I think we're at this tipping point where data is either going to be an equalizer, where we're building everybody's skills, preparing all students for this data future, or it's going to be another divider. And I fully understand that not everybody's 4-year-old will make them a bar chart out of Legos for their home office, but all 4-year-olds can make bar charts out of their weather observations. And how do we think about getting all of our students from our littles all the way up prepared to work with data, make sense of data, and understand where it comes from? So we are about to kick off the curriculum networking session, and curriculum implementation is super important, but I believe that we're in kind of a whack-a-mole moment. And so all of these different topics across our networking sessions today, as well as many others, we need them all. We need everybody at the table to really help with this, making sure data is an equalizer and that we're preparing all of our students to be data literate for this data future that we have coming our way. So that was really quick, and I'm super excited to take any questions that you have, but just wanted to share out, I think there's great opportunity, and what I really focus on is making sure our teachers and our school leaders who are super busy with many things don't get stuck in this situation when we have some tools and we have strategies that they can use to make it easier for them when working with data. So I'm going to stop screen sharing. I would be happy to take any questions that you might have or questions that have come up for anybody.
Awesome.
Helen, do you have some questions?
Yeah, thank you so much, Kristin. That was great. For people who joined a little bit later, just to give a heads up, we're going to do a Q&A now for depending on how many questions we have. And then after that, we'll be a little bit more dynamic where I'll break you guys up into breakout rooms and you'll have a chance to connect and network with people who want to discuss curriculum implementation. So feel free to drop the questions in the chat and then I'll read them out to Kristin. So Blake had a wonderful question. What is your recommendation for coordinators, curriculum specialists who are faced with having to choose where data science skills are taught? It seems like there's a split between math, science, and computer science among the districts that he's worked with.
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of the work that I do right now is there's a lot of people playing in the math space and the computer science space, and both that and sort of my opinion that it should be across all of our subject areas. Most of the supervisors that I work with are science or science and social studies, but I do also work with math, and then there are also STEM supervisors. And so when I talk to them, I'm like, okay, let's get it into our science, our technology, and our math across all of those. And so I usually approach it from whoever comes to talk to me, and then I say, and who are your colleagues? Who else can we invite into this conversation? How do we have that bigger conversation so it doesn't stay siloed in one set of courses that our students are taking, but we're thinking about this more broadly?
Awesome. If anyone else has questions, feel free to drop it out in the chat, but I'll give the sub question to Blake as well. Should data literacy and data science be incorporated into different frameworks? So data literacy in science or data science in math or computer science, if that makes sense.
So I think what Blake's asking there is, Blake, jump in if I'm wrong, but I think by frameworks, you might be referring to standards, as in like, should we be articulating specifically across the different standards, like what can we tackle in science versus in math versus in social studies? I am a firm believer that teachers in the classroom teachers do not need more standards. Now, I understand there's a real benefit for standards at the policy level and the state level and coordinating across, and standards provide opportunities for us to the opportunity to create assessments to actually get at those skills. But for teachers, I think adding more standards and more lists for them to check isn't necessarily the way that we want to go. I do think unpacking how fitting a function in math looks differently than analyzing a pattern in science, and from interpreting the data in social studies for a broader context, that piece is important to make it subject specific relevant for teachers, for them to feel confident and to actually start integrating it into what they're doing. So that translation piece, I think, is what I would say is really important.
Great. Blake, feel free to jump in if you want anything clarified about that. But right now, Rebecca has a great question about how you would implement data science into English.
I'm so glad you asked. This is so much fun. So I've worked with English language arts teachers in elementary and middle school and early high school. And there's multiple different ways that they have integrated it in. Some of the texts that they're reading, some of the fiction texts that they're having students read, actually have data visualizations in them, or they have statistics as part of the text of the prose that the students are reading. And so we've worked to augment that with a lesson where the students are kind of diving deeper into the data of those data visualizations. With others, we've worked on it as they're reading nonfiction text and the students' abilities to make sense of nonfiction prose. Looking at data sets that are relevant to the students. So either that the students are collecting themselves. One of my favorite ones was an English teacher at the beginning of the year last year had teachers create in her class like a histogram of the number of books that were on their shelves at home, or number of books that they had read. Now, this is an equity issue, and so understanding who your students are and how we can use it as a way to promote excitement about literacy and data at the same time is really important. But there's lots of different ways to integrate it in, and all the English teachers I've worked with really look at it as this is teaching critical thinking and teaching critical thinking of information, whether it is in graphic form, like their graphic novels, or in word form or in number form. It all sort of feeds into the same space. And then having kids write out what they find from the data and practicing those writing skills has been another great integration.
Awesome. While we were putting together this amazing network session, a topic that came up was resources. So Shayla has a great question. Are there links where we can access DS-specific lesson plans that have already been successfully implemented in school districts?
Yes, and yes. And I would say this community is a great place to reach out and ask for those links. I'm happy to share when we come back from the breakout rooms. I can't do it in real time. I'm happy to share a link that I often share out with teachers, which is sort of a repository of different places of data sets that I recommend folks accessing. But there are tons out there, and especially a lot around data science curriculum as it fits into a math and a computer science classroom. Within this community, make sure you ask those that you're in the breakout room with, because we've got a lot of knowledge in this room to share out on that. And don't reinvent the wheel. There's a lot out there.
Perfect. I guess on this topic of sort of timing as well, Julie had a point that she's faced some pushback of implementing data science into the curriculum. So she talks about wanting to implement DS in an after school club, such as Minecraft, Architecture Club, Citizen Science. So do you have any suggestions that you've seen that's been implemented or that works?
Yeah, so I think after school is a great place to work on data. There are a couple different projects that I've had the opportunity to work with over the last couple of years on integrating data into the after school space. The one thing that I would say in the after school space that's a bit different than within the school day space is that you don't know which students are showing up which day, and you don't necessarily know kind of the full progression of where the students are at, that like, you know, that knowledge that classroom teachers have when they've been with the students throughout the year. And so the way that we've approached it with the projects that I've been consulting on is to really think like really carefully, like what are the 3 to 5 things that we want students to be practicing on. So not everything from asking the question, collecting the data, graphing it out, iterating, analyzing, interpreting, communicating out, that gets really big and overwhelming. But what are sort of 3 to 5 skills that we want students to practice on in ways that are very student-centered and then the students are excited and empowered to work on. One thing I will say that I've seen work really well in an after-school setting is the data jams approach. And again, I can put a link for that in our shared document, because it combines sort of this making sense of data in a very creative, artistic way that the students lead. And so that would be another resource that I would recommend looking into.
All right, perfect. And we have time for one more question. So Mohammed wants to know, is there a choice need to be made about technology? So he says spreadsheets are good, but may not be the best tool for larger data sets. So if you have any advice on that. And he can jump in if I did not read that clearly enough.
I'm just going to pause to see if they want to jump in.
Yeah, I was just saying, for us at the North Carolina School of Science and Math, we made a choice to use Python, and it was based on our student population. And so I'm wondering, you said you were technology agnostic, but I'm wondering, would you make recommendations to a district or a school based on their access to resources?
Yes, so that I do. And I will say, so because I work with schools across the K-12 spectrum, so the first question with technology is usually kind of when to introduce it, and then the second question is what to introduce when, the subset of that second question. I approach it as I'm not a Google Sheets person and I'm going to make everyone do Google Sheets. I work with schools that are in Google Sheets and Excel and Data Classroom and Tuva and Python using RStudio. There are some that I'm sure I have not heard of, but there are lots that I work with and really supportive. What I try to do is help schools think about what are the resources you have and what is going to be the sort of time to get up on learning the tool, because we want to make sure that we have time for the data skills and data concept piece. And it's not only going to tool onboarding, but that we can onboard onto the tool and then use it as a tool to do what we really want to be doing.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for the wonderful questions. Thank you, Kristin, for answering them as well. Now to get to a little more dynamic part, you guys have been watching a lot of people talk, so now you have the chance to interact with people who are interested in the same topic as you. So I am putting in the backgrounder link in the chat that you guys can refer to regarding the participants on this call. You will receive an invitation for the breakout room, so just accept that and you'll be split up. The breakout room will be about 10 minutes. I'll send a broadcast message to sort of advise you on time. Then we'll return back to the main room, and then I'll reshuffle everybody so you have a chance to try to meet everybody here. There'll definitely be some overlap and repeats, but it's just a great opportunity to meet everybody. So you should receive an invitation now and feel free to accept.